By the turn of the 20th century, Missouri was one of the largest wine producers in the entire country. It was a huge source of economic vitality for the state. And when Prohibition was introduced, the entire industry was practically decimated overnight. The impact of Prohibition was personally and economically devastating, but it also set American winemaking back generations.
When Prohibition went in the 18th Amendment, you had wineries growing all over the country. There was a boom of wine knowledge and wine interest that was stopped overnight. There's a sign in Herman in one of the wineries that says closed by order of the federal government, and the sign is still up there because it, just to remind people this did happen and it was devastating. Herman had way more wineries before Prohibition than they do now, and they were all family wineries, and they were all run out of business.
There were wineries that survived in California, and I think there was one out east as well, by making sacramental wine. It wasn't going to happen in Herman. The vineyards were ripped out. It killed the town's economy because it was centered on wine and grape production. Prohibition just took out a whole generation of winemakers, and the technology was lost, the craft was lost.
It was devastating. On all accounts, Prohibition was devastating to Missouri's wine and grape industry. The loss of knowledge, I think, was one of the keys, and it was the biggest gap that was present when my father started the winery with my mother, and we didn't really have the research happening at the state level. All that experience was gone, and just the old vines and the culture and the traditions that were lost because of Prohibition. So you missed all that period of what natural innovation would have occurred. And you had to depend on entrepreneurs like my father or Mr. Held to restart the industry and start that road again. So it's very sobering to think about what could have been versus what is, given the devastating impact of Prohibition on Missouri.
Stone Hill, when the wine industry was killed, they converted the underground cellars to a mushroom growing farm. All the casks were gone. They built these beds for putting in compost. They were stacked all the way to the ceiling and planted the spores for the little white button mushrooms you buy in the grocery store. And it was a huge industry.
So Prohibition ended the American growth period for winemaking. It was a horrible experiment, and then they turned it around eventually. But what happened when Prohibition ended, and we wanted to start drinking again in the United States, wine was not the first thing people thought of because there weren't any grapes. Nobody saved grapes, essentially. Most vineyards were pulled out. So the Prohibition got people drinking beer and got people drinking spirits, because you could make both of those relatively quickly.
Prohibition, the noble experiment. The benefits of Prohibition have just never left us. It destroyed the wine industry for sure. There was a group of people who were allowed to keep making wine for sacramental purposes. No question about that. There were famously wine bricks that were being shipped from California with a little packet on top that said, caution, packet contains yeast. Do not add yeast to compressed wine bricks and water, otherwise alcohol beverage will result. Gotcha. It was a very popular item in Sears and Roebuck catalogs for crying out loud. So people were figuring out how to do business, but it was basically, the Missouri wine industry was destroyed. Virtually every wine industry, other than maybe New York, maybe California, and a few other places. Pennsylvania, Ohio had a little bit of stuff still going on for sacramental purposes, but we were out of business.